Hello and welcome to Clear Conversations, Closing the Experience Gap, creating best-in-class brand experiences in a post-COVID-19 world. My name is Geraint Jones and I'm Clare Saatchi's Global Marketing Director. And I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. It's great to see some old friends and some new ones joining us from brands like GSK, Western Union, Apple, PepsiCo, Clifford Chance, Activision Blizzard, Nespresso, Google, and many more. We're also streaming this session live on LinkedIn, so a warm welcome to our audience there too. As an attendee, your camera and microphone are automatically off, and you will not be able to turn them on accidentally, so you can completely relax. It's just the speakers who have to be prepared. This session is being recorded, and we'll be sharing it with attendees and those who couldn't make it early next week. So watch out for an email from my colleagues Saskia or Gary in your inbox. For updates about future conversations and to watch recordings of this and other conversations, you can visit clearstrategy.com. I'll put the link in the comments box, or follow us at Clare Saatchi on LinkedIn. I'll also put the link in the comments box. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A function in the bar at the bottom of your screen and start your question with the name of the panelist you'd like to answer. For example, Abigail, and then your question. Right, let's get on with the show. So, Clare is the strategy consulting arm of Saatchi, and as such, the crisis has had a pretty polarizing impact on our business. The impact of COVID-19 is being felt very differently in every sector, country, and business. And we took the decision very early on in the crisis to invest in some of our own proprietary research to understand how people's expectations around brand experience had shifted during the crisis. Using data from our own 2018 Global Experience Gap study as a comparator, we've identified some really interesting changes in consumer expectations around brand experiences, which we'll be checking up on again in the last quarter of this year. Today, our Chief Strategy Officer, Rhonda Hiatt, will share some perspective on what's changed since the start of the crisis, before we then debate some of the questions around brand experience those changes have raised with our fantastic panel. And I'm delighted to welcome this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world, Bradley Sachs from Delaware North. For nearly a decade, Bradley has directed the customer experience and operational excellence practices for Delaware North, who are a global leader in hospitality, with operations at Disney, in sports and entertainment venues, national and state parks, destination resorts, restaurants, airports, and casinos. And Bradley also acts as the managing partner of SHG Consulting, where he leads the firm's lodging, customer experience management, and operational excellence practices. We're also joined by Renata Policicio from ESPN, who leads the Research and Insights Group for ESPN's global markets. Based at the company's New York offices, she leads the Research and Analytics International team, responsible for providing strategic and actionable guidance to advance ESPN's brand understanding of the sports landscape and drive growth in ESPN's revenue-generating business units in more than 30 different countries. She's a multicultural professional with over 20 years of experience at major Fortune 500 companies such as Disney, ESPN, Warner, Microsoft, and other advertising agencies. We're also joined by Ron Burrage, who was most recently head of beverage design and experience at PepsiCo in North America. Ron is a strategic brand and design leader with extensive experience in CPG, chocolate, confectionery, food and beverage, beauty, grooming, toys, and games. He works in brand identity and experience development on both the agency and on the client side. He's led design for some of the world's most iconic brands and companies, including Disney, Procter & Gamble, Cranium, Hershey, and most recently, PepsiCo. We're also joined by Abigail Posner from Google's BrandUnit, Google's creative think tank for agencies and brands. She and her team work closely with the advertising and marketing communities to help them develop strategic and creative efforts for the digital space. Abigail is a recipient of the prestigious Media Impact Award from the UN, and she speaks at key conferences around the globe and has been featured in a host of publications. And finally, from Clare Saatchi, Rhonda Hiatt. Rhonda is our Chief Strategy Officer, and whilst at Clare, she's focused on growing our retail and shopper offering and delivering transformational and clear brand strategy for clients, including Reckitt Benckiser, Philips, Nautica, and Abbott. Prior to joining Clare, Rhonda was head of brand strategy and analytics at Interbrand Design Forum, where she focused specifically on retail and CPG clients. And I am now going to hand over to Rhonda, who will share with us some thoughts on brand experience in a post-COVID-19 world.
Thank you, Geraint, and welcome to the panel, everyone. We are quite excited to speak to you today about what's happening in a post-COVID world. Just to double check that everyone can see my screen okay? Yes, great. All right, so Clear Conversations today. What we're gonna be talking about is, as I mentioned, how to manage your brand experience in this post-pandemic, ever-changing environment. And I think the first ironic part of that is post-pandemic. We're, of course, still very much in the pandemic in many parts of the world, and we're going to be managing through that for a very long time. So what that means is there's no finite moment where we're going to change our behavior. We're going to be managing against our changing brand experience for a very long time. What Geraint had just mentioned previously is around a piece of work that we've been doing at Clare, which is called the experience gap. And essentially for the past couple of years, Clare has been actually going out to survey the market from both a consumer perspective as well as a brand perspective to understand what's actually happening between what a brand promises to deliver to a consumer versus from the consumer perspective of what they actually experience. Is there a gap there? Or is that pretty close? And so we have spoken to over 50,000 consumers across 6 different markets globally, and we've been publishing a report on that every year. And this year we had actually intended to share the results of that. But unfortunately, 2020 has had other plans for us across many different fronts. And right now, so many brands aren't actually able to deliver their experience in the normal channels and ways in which they're used to operating. So what that has meant is we needed to really rethink, what does this brand experience really mean going forward, and how do brands manage it in a post-pandemic environment? And the most important thing we need to do is start with our consumer and understand that behaviors have shifted. If we were in a different setting right now, we would probably be in a packed conference hall together where there might be an awkward, stage with bad lighting and a weird microphone. But we'd all be looking forward to the cocktails coming after the conference event. But in today's world, we're now doing these types of things online. The beauty of that in these behavioral shifts is we're able to reach a lot more diverse people more frequently and have bigger and better conversations. So there is some silver lining here. But what we want to think about from a consumer perspective, and we have actually done some research during COVID in the pandemic time to understand what is the pulse of consumers. And so I'm not going to go into a ton of research around that, but the one that really sticks out to us is this stat here. And it's 60% of consumers expect that a brand experience will change based on COVID. Now, that's not a reactionary expectation. That's actually a projection expectation. They want to see the changes that have actually happened positively as a result of the COVID experience. So what does that mean moving forward? What that means is brands are challenged more so than they ever have been before. And our opportunity, as well as our challenge, is to really figure out where to place your bets moving forward from an experience standpoint. So this chart just sort of personifies what's really happened during COVID. And these are just a couple of brands to highlight, but you'll see something like a rapid acceleration. So some brands have experienced a rapid acceleration, rapid adoption of their service, their proposition, something like Zoom, for example, where Zoom definitely had presence prior to COVID, but during COVID, it's absolutely skyrocketed. And they've had to make some real choices about how to overcome some of the challenges that they had and also scale at the same time. A brand like Hertz, however, has seen a rapid deceleration. If you've been watching the stock price go down, 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 that's because, of course, we've had to relinquish and reshape many of our behaviors around business travel and other personal travel as well. And so now that brand is potentially at risk for becoming obsolescent based on how, we start to recover within the economy. But then within that, we've also had the emergence of many new propositions. One of the ones I wanted to highlight here is focused innovation. So if you're not familiar with the brand Tushy, they're actually a bidet that has come onto the market. It was certainly happened, and they've been around long before COVID, but they've seen an absolute skyrocket in their brand as the toilet paper shortage certainly happened here in the US that you all can probably remember. And so what this really means is we're going to continue to have these acceleration moments, deceleration moments, and emergence of new. And the real question is, as a brand owner, where do you place your bets and how do you figure out where to make sure that your brand continues to stay relevant? So we're really excited about today's conversation, a phenomenal group of panelists, as you've heard from their bios. And we all know that we are faced with harder strategy than we ever have before. And so what we're going to do is kind of serving as the on-ramp to this discussion, and we really want to hear from the panelists, is really understand how are you making those priorities around how to deliver your brand experience? What are some of your predictions for the future and kind of where we're going to be going? What's going to stick? What's not going to stick? And ultimately, one of the things we've heard a lot during this COVID time is the role of purpose and having that absolute clarity on what your brand stands for and what it delivers to people. So how are we setting ourselves up to not have experience gaps in the future, and actually using this time to really reshape and enhance what we can do for people and the kind of value that we can bring to the world moving forward. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and Geraint, hand it back over to you for the discussion.
Thank you, Rhonda. Just a quick first question I think I'm going to jump into, just to try and set the scene and give everyone the opportunity to have a point of view. So I'm going to start with a quote from a gentleman called Mark Evans, who's the Managing Director of Marketing and Digital at Direct Line Insurance here in the UK. And Mark's quote comes from a discussion we had not long ago, which is this: what everyone is waking up to is that the fusion between brand marketing and customer experience is critical. So my question to the panel is, has COVID been a catalyst for positive change in your sector? And I'm going to come to you first, Bradley, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I think what it has done for us is given us time, first of all, that we may not have historically had to think about those things, to think about deeply certain parts of our experience that we may not have thought about as deeply before. It's also positively impacted us in ways we didn't imagine, which is being able to take advantage of our supply chain systems, and how can we even enhance those to continue to give us a better competitive advantage as a business. We're in the hospitality space with gaming and food service and retail and lodging, and so those are all obviously very consumer oriented businesses, and so being able to get product, to deliver product is an important part. So it's had a positive impact from that perspective. It's also allowed us to expand what were previously lesser revenue streams. If you think about in our food service businesses, things like to-go is obvious, and takeaway, delivery, those are all kind of obvious expansions. But other expansions, for example, selling butchered meats out of some of our restaurants that are known for having great meat, produce baskets, gift baskets. So expanding in different ways that can help us develop revenue streams that can continue on. It's also really helped us kind of sharpen our marketing skills. If we think about some of our businesses, say casinos or certain restaurants, if they have a high demand as they reopen, we have to make sure to get the right customers in the right seats, literally and figuratively, in those businesses. It's important for us to know that our most valued customers can still be customers with limited space. So it's helped us sharpen our marketing and better identify our guests, not necessarily based on their value, but who contribute more to the business and are more frequent. It's also helped us to be aware of obvious things, like the lodging business is probably fairly well known, and I've been in the lodging business for many years, for cleaning guest rooms so that they look clean, not sanitizing them like you would a hospital. That's never been the purpose, right? And so making that shift to thinking more about sanitizing as opposed to making things appear clean or still be clean has been a great shift. And that will obviously continue on, and is a benefit to us and a benefit to our guests as well. It's also had an interesting impact on our banking, financial, and lending relationships. So as we perhaps look to expand those relationships, it has helped us to deepen those relationships and to create more long-lasting partnerships as opposed to something that may just be an interaction. And overall, it has helped us really think about diversifying our businesses. How do we think about making our business more diverse? As I said, we're largely in the hospitality space. So what are things that are adjacent to that that we can do that would continue even if there was crisis like we're currently experiencing? And so those are some of the things that we found were really positive outcomes of the situation.
Yeah, it's good that you've been able to find such a lot of positives, I guess. I guess it's been hard, but I imagine it's also been hard for you, Renata, at ESPN, because I think the other sector that's been turned on its head, if not every sector, but one of the sectors more turned on its head has been sports. So, I mean, you were telling me yesterday about the sort of the crisis meeting the day it happened, where everything went up in the air. So tell me about what the positive impact's been at ESPN and how you've been able to manage the crisis.
Sure, it was not easy and getting better now as we have live sports back, but certainly has not been easy. But we can see some positive innovation and some positive acts for sure. I think the quote that you mentioned tells a lot, and we already had since before the pandemic this mantra that everything that we do is marketing, everything that we do adds or takes from the brand. So we already knew that, but in the beginning of March, that became even more important, even more, let's say, critical to the business, right? We had from one day to the other, we had a challenge to fill our grids. So without live games, what do we put on air? And there is, you also mentioned the experience gap that we had to fill for our fans. So the first thing was to show empathy. Our first, and that word has been so, I want to say, overused in the last weeks, but I think it was very authentic and genuine for ESPN. We probably missed sports as much, if not more, than our fans. So we went to them and said, hey, we are with you. We are working as hard as we can to really try to fill that gap. But back to the positive change, it really accelerated innovation in terms of technology and engineering for ESPN first, and for the leagues, for our partners. So after a couple of weeks, we had in the schedule the NFL draft. So how can we work with the NFL to make the draft first happen, that we don't have to cancel the draft, and second, that we can offer the fans an amazing experience, very different, but an amazing experience. So just to give an example, we had to send more than 500 production kits, including cameras and lighting and everything you can imagine, to the commissioner, to the players, to the coaches, even to fans. We had cameras on the house of some fans to try to recreate that excitement of the draft. It was interesting because you could see a little bit of behind the scenes, the house of important coaches and the commissioner, even the dogs. So it had a different feel to that, but it definitely accelerated innovation in technology and engineering that would probably have taken us, I want to say, a couple of years to get. Most of our studio shows have been done remotely. So you can imagine, how do you control a camera from home? And although the technology was available, we really had to work hard to make that feasible literally from March 12th to March 13 or 14. And another good example is how we were able to incorporate more esports, more video gaming to our programming. I don't know if you followed, but we started with a horse championship with NBA athletes. We had an NFL video game championship with athletes, celebrities, our anchors. We really tried to get creative, not only in terms of production, but in terms of content. And it paid off. A month after the mid-April, a month after the pandemic kicked, we saw very high levels of brand love with ESPN in our tracker. So it meant to us that, yeah, everyone is missing sports, but our fans understand that, one, we miss it too, and second, we're doing the best we can to fill that gap.
That's lovely to hear. That's lovely to hear. Abigail, from a Google BrandUnit perspective, how is it that you've seen the changes that COVID-19 has brought to bear being a positive? How have you seen your clients react, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to actually offer a B2B and a B2C perspective. I think the B2C perspective is kind of obvious, and Renata spoke to this, that we're now chained to our computers, we're chained to our TVs, which is great. So, app downloads are very high. People are really leaning into all the capabilities that technology like what we're experiencing today is offering us. from a B2B perspective, which is really my world, it's definitely been a very interesting ride. I mean, obviously, we appeal to so many different types of clients. So for those clients that are actually doing well, right, like the tech clients, that helps. For those clients who are really experiencing a lot of challenges, we then experience those challenges with them because we are their, their source of their platform for advertising. That being said, though, I think what is so heartening to see, and Renata kind of picked up on this as well, which is because of the situation that so many clients are in, no matter what industry, they're open. They're open to listening to new ideas, to new approaches, whether out of desperation or out of hope, right? And like Renata and what she did with ESPN, they're picking things up so quickly. And by the way, this is not just what I'm experiencing. I hear this from my partner companies as well, that now there is this openness, this transparency to let's learn together, let's build together, let's adopt new technologies so that we can both deal with the challenges we have right now, but also recognize there could be more challenges in the future. So I'm actually super excited. The speed by which we're actually executing work is much faster than we ever thought. The kinds of experimentation that we're experiencing with clients is much more vast than it was before. So I love this sense of openness. And to me, if we can continue with that sense of openness, even better. The final thing too is, because this need for insights, which is so much of what our team offers and so much of what Google and our platforms can offer, there is this soaking up, this hunger for insights, which is very gratifying to hear, because the more we can engage our clients and engage our partners with what people are doing day in and day out and how they're evolving day in and day out, because they are, the more they'll get into a habit of doing that. And one example of this is actually what we ended up doing. So we always tap our different trends resources, our consumer research resources like Google Trends, to help us understand what's going on, right? With a client, with an industry, with a certain element of the zeitgeist. But because people were evolving their attitudes, their behaviors overnight, we actually created a mechanism, almost like a news desk type of approach, where we would be constantly looking at the trends and seeing how they're evolving and seeing what's rising to the surface. And so those kinds of approaches to understanding consumer insight has been now really adopted by the people we're working with, which is really great to see.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point where we've seen it ourselves, actually, clients asking for more. I mean, I think we've done 5 or 6 of these now. And not only are they asking for more insights, but they're asking for more from marketing, from their colleagues in marketing. So we've heard from CMOs from a number of different B2B and B2C brands across the whole of the Clear Conversations series. And every single one of them has said, I have never been in as much demand. And every single one of them has followed that up with, and I have never had less resource. But anyway, that's a different topic and a different comment. I'm going to come to you now, Ron, if that's okay, and talk to you a little bit about the impact that this has had on the B2C and particularly the consumer goods space and how that's shifted the experience around.
Yeah, and clearly for every industry, it's been incredibly disruptive. And I think from a consumer packaged goods point of view, incredibly disruptive. So if you think of brands that historically relied on experiences, whether it be a beauty counter or a flagship store, those experiences were taken away. And one of the good things that I do think has come out of this is there's almost a leveling of the playing field, right? You don't have to be the big guy or gal on the front line, right? You can be a startup that's actually getting as much or more exposure than maybe some of your mass peers that are out there. So I think that's really exciting. And I think it's showing the need really for scrappiness as you think about your innovation plans, as you think about kind of your path to purchase, because it's completely changed from the way consumers have experienced it before. So I love the fact that it's made this space a little bit more democratic, which is great. But it's also put a lot of focus on the brands to really be true, authentic, follow their purpose, have an empathetic ear, be courageous. And I think it's lifting the veil potentially from some brands that have just had a veneer, right, and haven't really done the hard work at their core to understand what is our purpose, why do we exist in the world, why are we here, how do we make consumers' lives better, and some of that came out, like in the beginning phases of COVID. Some of the brand responses that we saw were almost, we almost felt for the brands, right, as we were reading their posts or seeing what they were putting out there, and others reacted really well. And then, of course, with everything that's going on from a racial tension point of view, that opportunity to really have a stake in the ground for what you stand for and what you believe in, it transcends the package. So I think in kind of the world as we know it today, there's this amazing kind of blending of traditional channels to non-traditional channels. DTC versus a traditional channel kind of doesn't matter as much anymore, right? It's you know, DTC used to be a way for a small player to get their product out there because they couldn't get into the traditional channels. And so we're seeing a big shift and change there. And then I really do love kind of this spotlight on the brands to get true with their purpose and their core.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely place to jump off to the next question, actually. I mean, for those of you who are not from the consumer packaged goods world, DTC stands for direct to customer or direct to consumer. So when you talk about direct to consumer and you talk about the blending of the different channels, I mean, there's obviously been a drive towards digital. Bradley, we talked yesterday about this idea that the economy has undergone an incredible shift. You know, I think there have been a huge number of memes talking around, you know, COVID-19 was the driver of my my digital transformation strategy. There's now a balancing act going on in a lot of businesses that we talk to about actually how do we bring back the physical? To what extent do we do that? Where do we bring it back? How do we do it in the right way to create a proper brand experience for the future fit that doesn't lose the lessons we've learned through COVID, but that actually uses all of the other channels to the extent that they need to. Bradley, given your space, where do you think people are leading the way? Which sectors do you look to that are leading the way?
Well, I look at what consumers think, and before COVID, consumers thought that companies in telecommunications, companies in banking and financial were very innovative with tech. Consumers thought they led the way. And people in retail and travel and hospitality, they didn't necessarily think innovated very much as with the use of tech. And what's been fascinating is what we saw post is how much consumers believe that the retail industry, and we're in the retail business in a variety of ways, have become the leading innovators. Think, how do they get their products to folks? How do they innovate online in the way in which they sell products? So I think historically, those leaders in innovation and using tech have been surpassed by some creative people in certain industries. And I think retail has been one of the big leaders in all of that. We have begun to look at digital and enhancing experiences in a few ways. One is think about some of our businesses like lodging, where you have to call in to make reservations, or many people still do that, especially in destination resorts where there's so much going on at the resort and it's not booking a simple business travel room. And so being able to use AI to give people answers to those questions, to be able to give them virtual reality to see what things at the resort really look and feel like. What does it feel like going down a zip line outside of Yosemite, as an example? And so that has been a way that we have enhanced giving people an experience before they even have the actual experience that they're planning. Those have been some of the things that we have done. And helping consumers find answers to COVID questions using AI, using chatbots, using things that I can get all those answers. How have you enhanced your cleaning methods? How are you social distancing? What limitations are there in your market for travel? And so being able to answer those questions really allows us to focus on the individual guest. And personalization has been a massive trend in travel and hospitality for the last few years anyway. But it's become even more important for people to really understand, how is this experience going to be personal to me? How am I going to change my plans in such a way that I'm comfortable with what's happening. And so using digital to respond to those things, to demonstrate what an experience might be like, we have found that those have been very helpful from our perspective.
That's really interesting to hear. I think, Abigail, I'm going to come to you next, because I think you'll have probably had a lot of people come to you for advice on how to do this well in the crisis, but also you'll have probably seen the different sectors take different approaches. Who have you been looking to and thinking, actually, they're doing a hell of a job. They're doing a really good job of thinking about not just their COVID response, but what they do beyond post-COVID, when they're going to come out of this with a different type of experience that they need to integrate?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to what Bradley said, there's no question that retail's definitely been leaning in and trying to figure it out, and still try to figure it out. Definitely a number of my clients have been doing that. I've seen it in some of the unsuspecting places too, right? Like, so on the side, I do a lot of public speaking, right? And what the industry has had to do, which relies on human to human contact. I mean, that was kind of the whole point of it. In fact, there is a client I have on the Google side, there's a client I have who's actually seeking our help to help them think through their conference. Like, all of a sudden, conferences are a platform, like they're a media platform that we have to think through and really enable something that we never really had to think about before, which is that interactivity, that serendipitous interactivity. Forget about the fact that you've got somebody on a stage and you like to, if you're close enough to feel their spit, you're in the front row. That's one thing. But really what conferences are all about is kind of this, I bump into you in the hallway, we make connections and we learn from each other. So you can't do that. That's an experience, a brand experience you can't do anymore. So all of these companies who rely on their conferences, forget about the conference industry, but they rely on their conferences as a way to galvanize their employees, as a way to connect with their clients, as a form of communication about what they're up to, what they're selling next year, right? They're huge. And now they've become a platform. They've become a platform for us to really think through how we can use digital to create these serendipitous interactions, these human experiences. So it's really a range, and it's a range from some of the suspecting types of clients or businesses and some of the unsuspecting. But the point is everybody is thinking about it. Everybody. And by the way, the other thing I want to point out is they're also finding ways to make that physical, to have those elements that are physical in different ways. So for example, one of the things that Google did, because we couldn't do our big conference, Brandcast, where we talk about YouTube, we actually did something that was highly personalized, and we created videos for people instead of being able to go and see it live. But yet we also sent them physical things to make the experience more interesting, whether it's physical things to make the actual tech experience more enjoyable, or pizza, so they can sit and watch and eat their favorite pizza. So we are rethinking, what is it that is actually physical about the experience that we used to offer? Can we reformulate that? Can we kind of digitize it? Or can we actually think of something else that we never thought of before that could be physical, that people could still enjoy?
I'm going to come to you next, Renata. I think that's a lovely way of putting it, Abigail. But Renata, I'm a huge sports fan. I miss live sport in a way that I never thought would be possible. It's like having a limb taken away. So I want to know how ESPN is thinking about working with your partners to bring that live sport feeling back, because it's not going to come back all at once. I mean, we see here in the UK, there's tests going on with people, sitting 6 feet away with like 5,000 fans sitting in a 40,000 seater stadium. How are you thinking about bringing back that physical element to the experience, and what are you doing differently as a result of COVID?
We're already doing so, actually. NBA kicks out today. So tonight we have our first NBA games coming from the ESPN Wide World of Sports in Orlando. We have really the privilege that they're playing in our house at Walt Disney World. But hey, that was a ton of work to make that bubble happen. And it's not a physical bubble, but how you bring the excitement of the live experience to fans, because you feel it. I don't know if you're a soccer fan there in the UK and if there are soccer fans in the audience, but the soccer leagues in Europe really helped us understanding what fans wanted. And I'll give you my own testimony. We were debating internally, and we still are, but we heard to fans and we have a better idea. But we were debating, should we try to replace, should we try to integrate virtual audience sound to the games? How does a silent game, feel to the audience at home? And so we did some tests, and the Bundesliga, which is the German soccer league, really did a fantastic test that was to offer the fans both options. So you could change between audio channels. So you could actually hear the match without a artificial crowd noise or with an artificial crowd noise. And I must be honest, in the beginning, it would sound horrible to have an artificial crowd noise. How can they do it so it is authentic, right? So it feels real. But hey, after I tried the first game with no crowd noise, I was like, oh, all right, I got it. And then we talked to fans, and we figured that 90% of them prefer to have some sort of crowd noise. So we listened to fans, and we are integrating that. With the NBA tonight, if you watch the games, you see that not only that crowd noise is integrated, but we enhanced production in the court. So you will hear the ball much more than you used to, and you will hear the players, and it will add an extra layer to that experience. You will hear the players and the coaches talking in a way you never did. So some things will stay probably, and hopefully the best of that new experience will stay. But again, it has been a challenge to replicate that emotion that live sports have, and then we will have to hold a little bit more to really getting the whole thing back. But we're doing our best to fill that gap.
Thank you. I mean, Ron, one of the categories that has a physical part of it anyway, and we talked about D2C in your first kind of response, is the CPG industry. Do you see changes in investment as a result of the increased focus on the value of physical? Are you seeing more investment coming in sensory? Are you seeing more investment coming in how packaging shows up in home? Are you seeing more investment in all of those elements?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a great thing about this in my world as a creative is this is kind of like exposing what we've been trying to do from the beginning, which is make every interaction with the consumer a memorable experience, whether it's, flipping through, their social channels, picking up the package, tasting the product, smelling the product. And that's hard to replicate when you're not physically in a space and in a store. So I think there's something really interesting about this idea of direct to consumer, because from a design and creative point of view, I've always believed, and the organizations that I've been with have always believed in consumer first, right? And I know Renata, a peer ex-Disney, it always was about that consumer experience. So I think it is changing the way we design from a CPG point of view in a couple of ways. One is if you think of, and Bradley mentioned as well, like the possibilities between virtual reality, augmented reality, in trying products on. I was on a pilot test for this amazing product that literally is putting makeup on my face, and it looks like I was, and for fun, I was at the counter and I could see shades, like true shades through my skin. Really amazing experiences. So if you think of what happened when I couldn't go to the beauty counter or couldn't go to Mac or Ulta like during this time, okay, how do I bring that to life? So that's one. I also think another thing that selfishly I'm loving is the importance of digital first, right? So if we think about a package, a six-sided box or a sphere, a can, whatever it happens to be, oftentimes we're struggling with all of the information we want to put on that package or put in front of the consumer. We want to just give them every bit of information we can. And from a design purity point of view, we want to strip it out to the pure essence. If you think of digital first, a pack that has 7 claims, everything, on the front of it, it's not going to perform as well in an e-commerce kind of world or space. So really bringing that pure nature of what the design is about in that little 1-inch square is more important than ever. And I think we're going to see, I think minimalist design has been kind of, a buzzword in the creative space for a while, but I think we're going to see more and more of it. And I think it's critically important because of the way that consumers are actually engaging with the product. So lots of exciting opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, from all of the answers to that, it feels like there's a lot of opportunity, but it feels like also the crisis has made people think twice about, actually, we should take that risk. We need to invest in this thing. We have to make sure that we kind of get on point about all of these things that we've sort of been pushing to the back of the queue for whatever reason. Rhonda, is this the moment of clarity on brand experience we've been looking for?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Geraint, as you hear our panelists just talk so much about the entire brand experience. And the interesting thing is when we're trying to import or export brand experiences, either into our homes or we're trying to be the owners of a brand experience and export it out to a consumer, you really have to have that absolute clarity on what does my brand stand for and what do I want people to experience from my brand. And as everyone has really touched on, it's not just the functional, but it's absolutely emotional. What is that connection? What is that lasting impression that we want them to leave with? And the sensorial side is so important. I mean, who would have ever thought, if 5 months ago I would have said ESPN was thinking about piping in fake fan noise for an experience, everyone would have thought that I had 3 heads, right? Like, we would have never expected that. But it just goes to show that by really having that absolute clarity on what makes a brand experience true and right, and what is the wrapper, what are those sensorial experiences, what are the elements that do actually drive that emotional and brand connection, it's so important. And I think all of you touched on how have you really had to ruthlessly think about what matters and what doesn't when you are trying to take your brand and really import it into someone's home and make sure that they are still having that connection, and you're seeing that come through in the impact of something like love for the brand, or how people are connecting, how people are engaged. And even the conference example, Abigail, that you brought up is so interesting, just to think about how that connection really comes to life, and what do you strip away that's not mission critical, and what do you need to really add in and almost even emphasize or enhance because we're not in that normal space that we have been in the past.
I think what really excited me about Abigail's answer was it sort of started to get us on this line towards demystifying or debunking this idea that digital automatically means inhuman, right? We hear a lot of that, right? We hear a lot of that right around the world about, oh, if we all rush to full digital, we'll lose all the humanity, we'll lose all the distinctiveness, we won't have real brands anymore. Abigail, I'm gonna come back to you on that point. Like, tell me how brands are doing it well to create these distinctive and human experiences by integrating that digital lens across physical and improving physical as a result.
I am very, very passionate about this whole sphere of humanizing digital. I mean, this has been my mission for the past number of years. So indeed, I think that people have assumed that digital was dehumanizing because they only used it in certain ways. Whereas there's just so many ways to connect with people, to truly connect with people when they're using digital in all of the ways that they actually can. So let me go back to that conference example, just because it's top of mind and we're working on something right now about this. Like it was said in the beginning, I think Rhonda brought this up, that, it is very human to be able to sit next to someone and smell their body odor. That's great. But you can only do that with so many people, because only so many people can afford to go to that conference. And only so many people can take time out of their day or leave their children behind to go to this conference. So how human is it that I actually can now, or whoever's on stage, can now share their thought leadership with so many more people who can then not just hear it, but then contribute back their feedback so that my message can be that much more relevant to them, right? That's just one little example of what, if used properly, this whole sphere of virtual conferences and virtual connecting can do. And of course, there are ways to even enhance yourself, right? So I can use some of these features. I mean, this is so technical and mundane for so many of us, maybe. But if I can use features to make myself look better, on the camera, then I feel better and I'm more confident. And the story that I tell can be more expressive. You know, of course, my mic didn't work for the first few seconds, so that wasn't great, but you get my point. So there's just, I think there's been this very isolated, limited point of view of what technology can do. And because we are now constrained, and constraints are awesome, limits are awesome. I'm sure Ron, as a creative, will agree with me on this. Every creative, every engineer, by the way, always likes constraints because it forces you to break your assumptions and restart and think again. And so because we are now forced and constrained to leverage digital like we never could before, all of a sudden we're coming up with so many new applications of how we can use it. And then just the final last thing, because I could go on forever. Again, if we want to be truly human, we have to understand human beings. And the best way to understand human beings is be on top of what they want and need. And because of digital, we have access to understanding human behavior en masse, so we can appeal to their needs right here, right now. I'll just give you one example of that. And we talked about brand purpose. You know, brand purpose also, it's not just emotional high order. Sometimes it's just being there when you are needed, right? And what we saw from some of the searches in the beginning of COVID was that people don't just tell me you're there. Give me the details of when you're open, what does curbside pickup really mean, when can I pick stuff up, how many people can go into a store. I want the details. And by providing the details, we were connecting to what was so important to them as a you know, this particular client we were talking to, that then the human beings that we were touching felt satisfied, felt like their desires were met, their challenges were met. That's purposeful.
It's brilliant. That's a really good way of putting it. I hadn't even considered the search strings, but actually when you think that through, that's people looking for reassurance from the brands that they work with, that the physical experiences that they have had for years and years that have been so familiar but have been so thrown up in the air by the crisis are still possible and are still manageable in some form. And they're looking for that reassurance. And if brands are providing that, then that's
exactly.
The route back to integrating physical.
So overnight, I'll just finish. So overnight, this one retailer that we were working with realized that they looked at their YouTube channel and looked at all the videos, and all the videos had nothing to do with these needs. And so overnight, we were able to change their videos so that we could answer the questions that people needed right here, right now. Next week, those questions are going to be different. But we can, thanks to digital, we can be on top of that and truly connect in a human way.
Rhonda, I mean, we've had a really good question actually in the comments box from John Rodman around, you know, how global brands are rethinking the physical experiential marketing side of things, and especially in that retail environment. As a retail expert, I have to come to you because what Abigail's just said suggests to me that there is a route back for retailers if they think about the way in which they use insight to create a new experience physically.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the panels touched on it so beautifully overall, but it's this cataclysmic change that we've had has paved the way for creativity and innovation like we've maybe never seen in perhaps our lifetimes. It's been a while, and it always takes a significant emotional event to really inspire change. And we've all experienced that together. And I think what we've seen in the headlines recently, you could read all of the retail headlines as doom and gloom, or you can read them as a giant reset and actually the path forward to what the future of retail is going to look like. We've sort of gotten a pass. We don't necessarily have to say our footfall numbers because nobody's allowed to football right now. We don't have to worry about traffic and all of that. What we have to worry about is what everyone's been talking through is really this connection. And so you see a brand like Nike, for example, you know, unfortunately having a lot of layoffs, and that is really unfortunate at this moment in time. But what it has meant is they're redirecting their efforts to how do I get as close to those consumers as possible? So you're seeing things like direct to consumers. You're seeing things like that brand portability we talked about. How do I actually get more human, closer to my consumer? And how do I know and understand their needs better? How do we reshape our portfolio so that we're actually innovating in spaces that are closer to those human needs, as Abigail just mentioned? And, you know, I heard this interesting term yesterday, and it's a blend of the words survive and thrive, and it's surthrival. And so I think what you've heard from a lot of these retailers is they really have two paths to take. they can either survive going in the way that they've, you know, done before and try to make minimal changes, or they can survival. And that can happen by actually really embracing change, creating massive disruption, potentially making some really hard decisions about where they were before, disrupting those typical channels that they were playing in. We're going to see malls completely change. They were already sort of dying, but we're going to see them completely change again, because what is at the heart of human behavior is still social connection. And so we're going to get it. We will seek it out no matter where we are, whether that's in a forum like this or whether that's actually physically getting back together again. And so as humans, we will figure it out, because we always do. It's just taken this big kind of cataclysmic moment to really accelerate the adoption around digital behaviors, tech behaviors, and ultimately we're going to land up in a place that still has that social component. Retail will never go away. It's the kind of the oldest thing that's ever been out there, right? It will never go away completely. It's just not going to look like it ever did before. And I think that's what brands really need to have an ear to the ground, is what do my consumers really want? How do I export and have absolute clarity on what is the essence of my brand that people need? To the point around purpose that Abigail made, knowing what role you play in their lives and serving them absolutely relentlessly, because that's how you create that lasting relevance as a brand.
That's lovely. I think I'm just going to pick up on the sort of the localization trend that we're also seeing, and particularly seeing here in the UK. There was an article this morning in one of the big national newspapers here around this idea that actually COVID's going to save the high street, or going to save Main Street. It's going to cause the out-of-town shopping mall to disappear. It's going to cause quite a lot of significant issues within major city center conurbations, but actually in local contexts, in smaller local high streets, in towns and villages around the different countries of the world, there is an opportunity for retail to come back and have a bigger impact by engaging locally with people. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the global context. We had a question in from Craig Welsh in the Q&A about whether firms have made major reallocation of their spend and budget around experience as a result of how different countries and regions have managed the pandemic. You know, I'm going to come to you, Bradley. Given your global role, are you looking at that globally and going, actually, we're going to invest more over here than over there because of the way they've responded to COVID?
We have, to some degree. So if we look, for example, at our lodging business, there are certain components of lodging that we have found consumers are very interested in and feel safe in. So you think about a traditional hotel where you're crammed into one large building, your room is immediately next door to somebody else's, you're sharing the same hallways and airspace. And what we have found is we've shifted marketing to our other products, like our cabins, where you're on your own, you can be fully self-sufficient if you'd like, or you can join in the public areas and the activities that happen there, food service, activities, spa, etc. So what we have shifted to is the things that consumers are now more comfortable with, the parts of our business that the consumers are more comfortable with. And that includes in food service things like the takeaway services and gift baskets and delivery services. And from a geographic perspective, we found people are reasonably similar in their views as to what they want to do with their behaviors. You know, a shift towards value and essential purchasing is a great example that we've determined. So our resorts that may be more value oriented, we've switched marketing efforts to those as opposed to perhaps our more luxury or high-end resorts. We have resorts, you know, on the reefs in Australia, and very high-end, very costly, marvelous and wonderful personalized experiences, but with people being a little bit more value conscious. So we've looked at the behaviors that the consumers have, and we switched our marketing dollars to better align with those things than as opposed to even perhaps what may be a more profitable piece of the business to something that consumers are now perceiving as something they want to do or will do.
Ron, I'm gonna come to you next. I think I have a question really about the sort of the purpose piece that everyone has been talking about. I think you talk very passionately about this. When it comes to consumer packaged goods, I'm gonna be very, very broad brush here, but they're not renowned, apart from perhaps Unilever actually, for being very purpose-driven businesses in an obvious and open and public way. But even my own experience in the last 4 months has suggested that that's shifted. Are you seeing an increased sense of purpose amongst CPG brands? Are you seeing that that's going to show up in home? It's going to show up in the way they package. It's going to show up in the way that they produce product. It's going to show up in the way that they respond to new and challenging legal constraints, like the kind of no marketing of fast food to children in the UK before 9 p.m., which came in this week. Do you see that purpose thing becoming more important rather than less important for CPGs?
I think it's absolutely more important, and it continues to be that way. I don't think purpose is a new thing. I think as brand builders, we've been talking about it for a long time, but I think there's two sides of it. One side is purpose for many years was an internal tool that we would use as like our North Star, where we're delivering. And we didn't spend a lot of time telling our consumers what it was about. We also, recognize that a lot of companies kind of kept it a bit to themselves because they didn't want to be put in the middle of a political turf, right? And we're seeing more and more that there's going to be backlash if you don't take a stand. I love this idea of if you're not saying anything, you're saying everything. And so, that purpose behind every decision that a brand, a product, an experience makes, it's something that the consumers are looking for and yearning for. I think some of the newer brands that we see kind of like coming into the limelight have been about storytelling, which is a form of explaining your purpose, right, to the consumer. And so I think more and more of that is going to be critical. Even as we think of, what in the past used to be considered a store brand or a retail brand, there's stories that are coming to life behind that and purpose behind that, because then you're getting a sense of, well, what is the retailer putting behind their brand? So I think it is critical. I think it's going to kind of be a check mark on the consumer's radar of like, what does this brand stand for? Do we stand for the same things? Are we like-minded? Is this a brand that I want to support and put my name against? Me wearing, X t-shirt is also a sign that I support that company. And maybe that company isn't in line really with what my feelings might be. So I think transparency around purpose and authenticity around purpose and courage about actually putting your purpose out there for the world to decide if they want to be part of your story or not is going to be more critical than ever.
Super. Renata, I'm going to come to you and we're going to wrap after this. I'm going to do a bit of summary, but I'm going to come to you lastly, just to talk a little bit about how ESPN's purpose has guided your actions both through the crisis, but also guided your actions as you plan for beyond the crisis.
So our purpose, I think, has always been very clear, not only internally, but to fans. Our mission is serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. And I think fans hopefully feel that for the last 40 years. But interestingly, we changed our brand promise right before COVID. And it was great timing. Our new brand promise now is ignite the fan in all of us. Ignite is really now, especially now, how we keep that flame of sports going. So really empower and bring the fan in all of us. The fan, so ignite the fan-centric. The fan is center on everything that we do in all of us, not only for hardcore sports fans. How we expand the definition of sports to touch everyone. I think it has never been more current than now, right? We didn't know how relevant it was going to be, but it's absolutely relevant. So how we keep that flame going, how we empower you as a fan, and how we expand the definition of the sports experience. And that's what I think, and we hope fans feel, that our purpose and our promise, and it has been hard to deliver on that promise now, but we have been tracking that and hearing that fans really feel that ESPN is there to serve them and to really keep the flame of sports going, even through the toughest times we have ever seen.
That's a lovely point to end on. I think we've all been, to certain extents, trying to keep the flame burning for our particular sectors throughout this crisis, right? I think if you look at every sector and you look at COVID as a thing, it's impacted us all totally differently. It's been a really challenging situation for every single brand, whether they've ended up doing well out of the crisis or whether they've been absolutely hugely challenged by the crisis. And I think what I've really taken from today's panel, and thank you so much to this fabulous panel from all these different brands, I think what I've taken from this is three key points. One, there's been this repudiation of this idea that digital means inhuman in the experience. And I think it's been really powerful to hear people from lots of different backgrounds all say the same thing, which is actually now we're in a place where the physical experiences we all know, love, and want to return in some form are going to be enhanced by a digital experience that creates even more opportunity for human connection. And for me as a brand professional, that excites me. That makes me feel like we're on the cusp of something really big. Two, I think the other part of this that excites me is this idea that purpose is going to drive things. We've got this idea that purpose has got to be front and center in the way that brands show up in the experience. They can no longer just do the bare minimum. They have to show up and say, this is how we're going to show up in your lives. This is how we're going to support you through it. And the brands that do it are delivering something that's really important to their own brands, which is trust. They're building a trust and a level of depth of trust that I think will pay off really well for them as they come out the other side into the recession and beyond. And then I think the final point I'll make just to wrap up is this idea that actually we are going to get back to some form of experience that includes the physical. But if we don't take a data-driven point of view on how to invest and which elements to invest in, then we're going to go back to the same mistakes we've been making forever, which is treating the experience as an overarching single element rather than dividing it up into things that have a real impact on how we feel and things that we just have to have but don't need to invest in hugely. So this idea that we can be more efficient in the way we spend, smarter about how we spend and where we spend geographically, physically in the customer experience journey, I think is absolutely crucial for brands as they look to work their way through what will be a very challenging recession to come. All of which says to me that there are some real positives, despite the fact that all of us are struggling in one way or another. There's some real positives to take away from this. So thank you so much to this fabulous panel. I'm going to wrap it up now, and please join the next Clear conversation, which will be in the last week of August. We're going to look at 2021, and we're going to look at the future for financial services brands in 2021. So please join us for that if you can. But that's it from us. Thank you and goodbye.